Alrighty, Mark, welcome to the second podcast of Photography Therapy. And it's my pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here too. Yeah.
And give us an introduction of who you are, what you do, and what you shoot with.
Okay, so my real name is Mark Box, and I work for Cambridge University Library, and I'm the lead photographer on the Darwin Correspondence Project at the moment. I've been working on that for coming on maybe 3 years now. Obviously started it just before the pandemic, and there was a big lull in between. But we came back. I think we only had about 6 months kind of working from home, and we were taken back as research staff because we're obviously providing research materials. And not only do I just do that, but we, as a photographic team, we work with like multispectral imaging, RTI photography, photogrammetry, 3D scanning, all sorts. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nice. And in your photography, what gear do you use, and why have you chosen it?
So I shoot with the Fuji X-T3 mirrorless camera. I used to shoot with Canon, but I found that it was just too big. It was too cumbersome. The lenses that I wanted to use for the street portraiture, it's just too intrusive. And if somebody saw you coming along with a big kind of camera like that, it just wasn't fit for purpose in that sense. So I switched over to the Fuji, and I found these Viltrox lenses, which again they were cheaper, but they had they were fast lenses like 1.4, and I really like the idea of being able to capture a portrait and isolate them from the background. So having a fast lens was really good. It's small, it's a small form factor, but also aesthetically it looks nice. So it's also a talking point at the same time as well. I've got a nice little leather strap and a holder on it, and people think it's a film camera because I use it like a film camera. I'm not constantly looking at the back of the screen. Take the shots, boom, 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 I'm done. So that's what I use, and I take it pretty much with me everywhere. Whereas with the older Canon camera, 5D Mark III I was working with, you don't, it's heavy, it's too heavy.
It's a tank, isn't it?
It is.
It's a tank, and as you say, I think if I would get approached by someone who's taking pictures on the streets, I would be like, okay, this is a bit too much of a camera.
And I always, when I see other Canon, say, photographers with the big lenses and stuff, I always say to myself, I don't ever want to be one of these photographers walking around with these big, lenses and stuff. I just want to be me, discreet. It's not the lens that you really want to notice first. It's the person that's kind of approaching you. So that's helped a lot. That's really helped a lot.
I agree. As you were talking about Canon and the big lenses, I was at the Mayball the other day. I think it was a Darwin or something. Yeah, I was a Darwin, and I was one of the photographers, and there was many of them. And there was this gentleman. I can't recall his name because I didn't ask for his name.
Yeah.
And he was there shooting an event with a big ass Canon.
Yeah.
And a 600mm on top of it, and I just couldn't I was petrified of it. And I'm a photographer, I know what that gear is, and it looks like you have a car in your hands. It's like a bazooka.
Lens, yeah.
Like Jesus Christ. So I get what you're saying about too big of a gear can scare people off, I think.
Yeah, and it's not practical as well because you never know what you're going to what you're going to come across, what you're going to shoot with. If I think at the moment I'm shooting with a Viltrox 75mm 1.2, and it is so soft. It is so soft. It's creamy. The bokeh is lovely. At 1.2, it's near pin sharpness. You've got to get the focus right. So I don't use the eye tracking on there. I just kind of go with, I've got some of the focus peaking going on, but it doesn't always kind of work because what I do is I use a mix of autofocus and manual focus, so I can, so the focusing is actually done with one of the hotkey buttons on the back. So I use that to autofocus. And then obviously with that, if you need to kind of, you can set the focus with that and then move around and set your exposure and then come back and take a click. But sometimes the autofocus doesn't quite work, so you can just do a quick flip of the autofocus on the lens itself, and then when you obviously zoom in with the actual barrel of the lens, you'll get the digital zoom display through the eyepiece, and it will zoom in to the area that you've set your focus square at. And you can, I need to do that a bit more because obviously I work quite quick. So yeah, it's just such a nice lens, and it's more restrictive in how I normally photograph, because I used to shoot in a 56 millimeter, so 1.5 conversion is about 80 something millimeter, 86, whatever, 82. I'm terrible at math. I'll let you know.
It works.
Figure it out. But this one is equivalent to like a 100 plus millimeter. But again, it's a lot more kind of compact. Everything's more kind of compressed within the frame. So you need to get yourself a little bit further back. Whereas before I switched to the 23 equivalent of 35 millimeter because I thought, well, the idea is I was trying to encompass the colours of the sitter, the person that's in the frame, with a bit of kind of analogous colours in the background. So if they're wearing like yellow and there's some like yellow flowers or yellow signage or something, you've got that kind of analogous kind of colours in the background which make the picture. So you want to also include the background, but you obviously shooting wide, you keep that distraction away and you're focusing more on the subject. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, as I said, going from the 35 to that, I was like, whoa, but the results are so much better. Just that extra stop wider at 1.2, it's mad. It's so worth the challenge. It really is.
I also recently started to shoot with a 1.2. I shoot with the Sony for events, even for my street photography. Although don't do much of it, but that 1.2, as you say, it just unbelievable.
Makes such a big difference, and it's weird because I thought it, and I've had some other people have commented saying it looks like it's been either photoshopped or like the iPhone algorithm where it kind of blurs out the background because it is just so soft, but it's just gorgeous, and I really like using that lens. It just, again, it gives a very different look, but it really does make the subject stand out a lot more. So to try and get more of that 35 millimeter look, you just have to step back, but you got to think on your feet as well. You got to think, okay, where am I going to be shooting? Have I got the room to kind of do this? So before, if I see someone, which is so much thinking goes on, you don't realise. But as soon as you see someone, you're looking around at places as you're walking up to them to figure out where is the best place I can do this. And if you think, okay, it's not going to work, or I haven't got a 35mm that I can just switch over to, which I sometimes do. Sometimes you have to give it a miss. It just depends on the timing and what you think is going to work with it. So, but yeah, long story short, regardless of the challenges, it's worth it.
Brilliant. And now, can you talk to us about your main project?
Humans of Cambridge.
Humans of Cambridge, of course.
Mm. What do you want to know about it?
Well, I remember I met you in the very beginning. Not the very beginning, but there was an
early doors, yeah.
Early stage.
Early days.
And I didn't have that much of a chance to ask you how did it start?
Mm.
Where did it go now? What are your inspirations? Why do you photograph people? What is your subject matter? So start from telling us, how did you start? What was the whole concept? What was the whole idea behind it?
It was through lockdown, and that was when we were allowed to kind of start going back out. I wanted to go out and kind of document people. It was a very kind of surreal time, and people were just kind of, venturing out again. People were worried about, intermingling and being social again. There was that kind of anxiety. And that's when I sold some of my Canon lenses and, got the money towards buy the Fuji, which I got secondhand with very little actuations on the shutter count. I was like a bargain. And then I bought the kit lens, the 18 to 55. Again, really good for a kit lens, but the quality, and it was only f3.5, 2.8, but
2.8 to f4. That's the lens.
Yeah, and the problem with that is when you're shooting 55 at 2.8, is it 55? Yeah, 55 2.8. Sure, that's okay. But then if you want to zoom in a little bit more, you go into f4.5, I think it was. So you just don't have the prime lenses. Just shoot prime lens. That's what I do, and that's why I with my Viltrox I have a whole system. I have the 23, the 56, the 85, which is what I got before the 75. So I'm going to get rid of that because the 75 is much better. But anyway, sorry, I digress. I just wanted to go out, and I had a street camera which gave me the freedom to be able to just wander around, not worry that somebody's going to want to nick my camera because I've got a big fancy Canon with 100mm portrait lens. Because that's what I would normally go out and shoot with, or I would shoot with maybe a pancake lens, 40mm, because again that's really nice and sharp, and you can get a good bit of distance. So I got the 56mm first, Viltrox 1.4, and that gave me the distance that I needed to keep away from people, but also be able to approach them and just say, and obviously they're not aware of how close I'm going to get, but obviously I didn't need to get close, so there was no, social anxiety, that was made because I was getting maybe too close into their personal space. But there was a woman that I saw just in the village, and I walked past her, and she was just kind of sitting on a little front bit of her garden, just like looking out, hand in her, chin, and just looking out, just thinking. And I said to her, "Oh, can I capture this moment?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure. How do you want to just the way you were, just the way you were." And for me, that was like one of the first kind of pictures that I really took on that. And from there, it just gave me, an idea to start going into town. I walked around and I did a lot of usual street photography stuff, capturing candid stuff. But then I started to it's interesting seeing it as I look back at the work as well. I would find interesting people, because obviously people are coming out, a lot of people are wearing masks, but everyone's being creative with their mask as well. So I would do single portraits, but then I started, slowly, gradually kind of noticing more things about people. And it actually helped me realise that to be a bit more aware of your surroundings, not only of the people, and obviously, you look at someone, you're making eye contact, and then it's like whenever I'm talking to someone, if I approach them in the street now, I'll have a chat with them and just talk about what I am. But then I'm looking all around and I see all these things that I've kind of had a little glimpse of as I approach them. And I think when they notice that you notice things about them, it kind of makes it a lot easier. And I think they appreciate that you see these little things. But my only regret was when I photographed a girl called Nicola, who was literally, for me, she was like the inspiration for Humans at Cambridge. For making it is what it became and what it's kind of turned into. And that was a shot on Burrell's Walk, and I'd done just 2 shots, like a 3/4, maybe a slightly closer one. I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd done the approach that I do now, focusing on more details, but it was more, I kind of got really excited, and the green hat and the green coat and the auburn hair and the auburn leaves and the leading lines, and the path behind it, and it looked lovely. And especially I wanted to create like a film preset, shall we say, in Lightroom, capture one, then back to Lightroom, all down to workflow.
But would you? Does she still live here? Are you in touch with Nicola?
Yeah, I've shot her a couple of times before, and
Okay.
I've actually talked about her before, and yeah.
Okay, so you had the chance to take some more pictures.
Yeah, and again, they've all been really, really great pictures. She's a wonderful human. She's got an interesting story herself, and that's what I find fascinating, is that all these people that you pass in the street, everyone's got their kind of, shall we say, rich resting bitch face.
Yeah. Everyone has it.
And when you get to meet them the way that I do, it's pretty awesome, because you get to get a little glimpse of their personality, get to see, the smile that only their friends or family would see, So for me, the experience of that is obviously what I like to share back in the images, because you are actually sharing an intimate moment with that person, a complete stranger. And you're seeing genuine smiles, genuine reactions, and it's lovely. And my way is just, and again, the reason why I don't look back at the pictures is because you should never look at your pictures when you're photographing things. You can do that later. There's no point. It's counterintuitive, because you end up going, oh, delete this one, delete that one, and then you realise the one that you kept was actually out of focus because you're looking at the screen and it's daylight and you thought you saw it right. Do that later, because the real fun happens when you actually upload them. You put them into your software. Like I said, I use Lightroom now because it's much better workflow. I do a lot of selection process, but it's very quick and intuitive. But the biggest joy is when you import your raw files, and I import them raw, and I don't do any applied settings first, because I want to see what the raws look like first. And they don't look great, they're just like a blank canvas, it's weird. But then when you apply your presets, so I don't use any of the Fuji kind of film simulations, I just kind of drop them in raw and then apply my own Lightroom kind of preset that I've tweaked over and over. I think I'm like Mark 6 at the moment. But then you see the transformation, and then they literally turn into the images that you've envisaged in your mind, and they come alive, and it's such a buzz. And then you apply them to all the images, and then you do your selections of the different perspectives that you've kind of you've done, your different angles, and then you mark those as yellows, and then you go through a second time and you go, okay, I'll mark that one as definitely green, and then you've got your selection. Instagram, 10 images maximum. If I've sometimes had like 20 or that I've kept, because I'm like, man, these are so good. So then you can use those as stories, or something you can use for future posts, or something you can maybe turn into a cinemagraph and create these cool little animations, which they're really cool. I enjoy kind of playing with those. So to answer your question, why did I why did I do it? Well, there you go. That's the reason why I did it. Again, it's getting a chance. The reason why I did it was it was an opportunity to just get back into the population, to how are you doing? Are you okay? Yeah, you look good. It was for me as well, because I wanted to, I'm a social person. I'm like an introvert extrovert, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah.
I feel you, absolutely. I feel you.
And it's nice, and I find it took me a little while to fine tune the approach, because you can't just walk up to somebody and say, "Oh, can I take your picture?" Why? There's no context to it. There's no meaning, And I eventually learned that, why am I approaching this person? You know, what is it that that's kind of caught my eye? You know, it could be, you know, you could have a huge beard. I'm thinking, oh, it's an impressive beard. So then you can walk up and say, dude, that's an epic beard. You know, you're not making a pass. You're not making, you know, bodily observations. You're appreciating something about them. I think, again, clothing-wise, they could have like a wicked jacket on, or like bright coloured pink boots, you know. And you say, like, you know, you like the boots. You make a genuine comment about what they're wearing. And obviously, first impression obviously makes a big difference. You're then relating something. You have a connection because you appreciate something that they also like, that they also appreciate, and that they've been noticed. And then that way you can just, you know, then just say, look, you know, I like this. I'd love to take a portrait, you know. And then you start, as I said before, noticing other things about them.
I think that's a good advice for someone who loves or is starting in street portraiture. Because street photography is one thing. You usually wouldn't ask. Street photography is just you snap a moment and it's gone.
Yeah, and it's interesting because lately I've actually had somebody message me, and he's a journalist doing lecturing, and he said he contacted me, and he said he's been looking at other humans of, you know, like portraits and whatnot. But he says mine's, you know, is more intimate, because I pay attention to the detail of people, and just the way that I photograph them. So he actually wants to use my account. So he's going to send his students to look at the account and use my account as an example of how to do this. And you know, that's
you're becoming like a piece of history. It's incredible.
Oh God,
it's crazy.
But it's interesting because it's weird because for me now it doesn't really seem like rocket science as such, but it's, yeah, I guess it is different. It's not street photography, but it's definitely street portraiture. But it's more intimate. It's more engaging.
Intimate street portraiture.
Yeah.
I think it will be described as that because it's intimate because you connect to people.
Yeah.
Street because it's happening on the street, and portrait because it's vertical. Like,
but I try and make it my art as well because you know, this is my work. This is my artwork. I do it all my own time. All, you know, the editing actually takes, as much as I rave about how quick I am at editing and selecting, the actual, you know, the selection process can take longer than you think actually. You know, for example, with you today, you know, I think I took maybe 10 different scenes. Some of the scenes I did guerrilla shoot a little bit because normally I do 3 or 5 shots per scene because, you know, one of those is going to be the one that is going to be best, and you never know. And that's the interesting thing. You could take 1,000 shots, but only one of them, or maybe 10 of them, are going to be good. But then you've still got to whittle it down to at least one. But if you take 3 or 5, one of those is going to be the one that you're going to choose anyway. And if it's not quite what you thought you got, it's close enough. Don't beat yourself up about it. You know, these things are fleeting moments. You're catching a fleeting moment. So if you're set up, you know, if you're set up properly, especially if you, for example, I shoot the, you know, was it 3 to 5 frames, three frames a second. But then I know if I've got to capture quite a lot of movement, then I'll switch it up to, I can't remember if it's like 10 to 15 frames. You know, high speed shutter. So that's, you know, you just got to think ahead and, you know what you want to do. And also it's quite good to ask if, you know, how much time you got, you know. Normally what I say is, you know, I'll take 30, 60 seconds. Sometimes I'm like...
Take notes, listeners, take notes, because this is important information.
You know, if you always say, because if they're unsure about it, because if they're like, oh yeah, but they'll take 30 seconds, 60 seconds top, you know. So you're almost coming across as a salesman, you know. You're trying to get them to buy into giving them giving you their time. Did I say that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
And yeah, if they're unsure, give them a small window. Like, it's not going to take long. And I don't know if the picture's going to look good. They always look good. You know, everyone I photograph, if any of the images I think make the person look slightly kind of goofy or whatever, I won't put them up. I put up what I would want to be, how I would want people to see me. Sure, there are some pictures where people are pulling funny, goofy faces, but that's because they've done that themselves rather than catching like an off-guard goofy face, if you know what I mean. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like a mid-talk and like, you know, nobody likes that. So yeah, it's that.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that I kind of started following since the beginning to now. And now I even deleted the Instagram app because I'm like...
Really?
Yes, I have the account and everything. I do log into it, but...
I did actually try looking for you earlier and I was like, where's this thing?
No, because I just looked at my screen time. And you know, iPhone gives you all the statistics. And on Instagram, I don't work on Instagram. I don't post on Instagram that much. And the only thing I do is scrolling. Everyone gets into the depths of it, per se. And I noticed that 2 or 3 hours a day just disappear like that. And I decided just to delete the app.
So it's interesting you say that because I totally get with the doom scrolling. But what I find is at the moment I've got a backlog of humans, shall we say, to post. And I always feel bad that it's taking a long time because I post one a day or a couple, but I try and restrict it to one. A, because I don't want to photobomb and fill people's feeds like I used to in the beginning, like boom, you know, here's 12 pictures. Because from some of my friends' feedback was, oh yeah, you know, Boxy's photo dumped again on Instagram, you know, my feed's just full up with it. You take away the magic of it. Yeah. Some people are waiting, you know, 2, 3, sometimes like a month for their post to go up because they're that far behind the queue of people, because I post people in order of date taken. So, and obviously I'll switch a few things around. If you've got two very similar, you know, if you've got a series of people all wearing red, great, that's great for a theme. But the idea is when people look at the grid, for example, you're seeing very different individual people, different looks. And again, it's aesthetic, it's completely subjective, you know, and that's the way that I see. But it's like your gallery, you know, it's your art, not content. I don't like to call it content because
it ain't.
It is, but the idea is that I'm not. If it was content, then I'll be whacking loads of stuff out for it, and that's not really the method I want to do. So.
And how many people have you photographed so far? Have you got a rough figure in your head?
Probably around.
Many. Like I can imagine how many. If you still have a backlog of this.
Okay, there's some. So maybe I don't know. 1800, maybe 1900.
1900.
Don't forget, there are some people that I've photographed a few times before, but these are individual posts based on the Instagram thing. So there's probably about let's just say 1,500 complete individuals, because I can't remember exactly how many times I photographed other people. There might be some dogs and stuff in there as well.
That's impressive.
And do you know what's funny? Because the way that I manage my workflow, because what I do is once I've edited in Lightroom and then create the high res, I'll then do a Photoshop action to do the border. I upload the border images onto Google Photos, so they're there. And then what I do is I then download a batch that I'm going to post onto the phone, and so I have access on the go, so I can do it anytime. And then once they're done, I can delete the ones there on the phone, free up space. But that's the way that I found is the most efficient way, and I can also back up the photos. And it means if anyone wants the photos, they're already online that I can share them with in that way. Obviously, I don't share the high-res photos because, again, that's my work. If somebody really, really wants those photos, that's where I go, okay, I'd like some kind of return for the effort that I've done. Sure, I don't mind giving them a low-res copy for them to share on social media because they've given me their time in that sense, and that's good enough for that. But again, if they want a physical, because I've had people ask for high-res images, and then I said, "Oh, what do you want them for?" "Oh, I want to print them." I'm like, "Yeah, that's a little bit cheeky, I guess." But tell you what, here's what I do, and I'd say 8 out of 10 times people are like, "Yeah, absolutely." But sometimes I just get people just ghost me. I'm like, you could just say no thanks.
Mamma mia, però, really?
But it's very few, and I think it's just, maybe people expect, some people might expect things to be free in that sense. But like I said, it's the project itself, I do it in my own time, it takes a lot of time, and I have to make time to catch up on the editing. I've got a load still to post that are sitting in the archive. I still have a load more to keep track on. And obviously I go out and I shoot as well, and then that gets put back in. So there is a lot of time that goes into it. It's like a job. It's literally like a job.
It really is.
So...
Would you ever think of releasing a book?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, but I think it needs to have at least, it's been nearly 3 years. I think maybe in the next year, maybe after 5 years, it's got a bit of history.
5 years is a good milestone.
I think that's a good time to, because I'm still evolving, developing, and it's interesting because when I look back at some of my earlier stuff, which I thought was amazing, it's not really that not really that great. My white balance was questionable, I'm actually thinking of maybe going back and re-editing some of the older stuff and then maybe reposting.
Have you still got the original, the raws?
Of course. No, do I have? I have all the raws. I have all the raws, the high-res versions. I always keep a backup of all the stuff that I've shot because
Take notes.
Yeah, never delete the raws. Just get yourself always back up your work. So I'm now working on my laptop, and I can time machine that back up to another external kind of personal drive, which means that's backed up. But then once I've maybe reached the capacity of that, I'll back that up onto maybe 1 or 2 others that are kind of elsewhere. You can get a terabyte or 2 terabyte drives that are fairly cheap. So it's really important to back up your work, not just once, but at least twice, or have like a RAID drive at home, so you can, you've got the drive that you're working on, that you can then back that up and have that time machine backed up, or if you're working PC, just do a backup that way. But it's really, really important. I've got raw files that go back to 2006 when I was first got back into digital photography, and I've got so much work that I don't really need to do any more studio work. I used to have a studio on is it King Street? It's part of Christ College. And I would basically, it's now been knocked down. So when you look in the loft bar at Stolen, you could look out and you could see my studio. It's not there, it's all gone now. It's heartbreaking to see. I was watching it all just getting slowly crumbled. But, I did loads of cool stuff in there. But it's interesting as well because I found, I've mastered Flash to a degree. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I just found... I found working with Flash, it was a lot of work, a lot of time consuming. You can be super creative and stuff, but you need a studio for that. Sure, you can use Flash outside, but to be honest, I like the challenge of trying to use the natural light source, because photographers in the old days, they just used the one light, the sun god, and working with that light, it helps you figure out how to position your subject, how to utilize the shadows, shade. Working in bright sunshine is an absolute nightmare. And there is a way to get away from that as well if you're editing. If you've had no choice but to shoot in the sun, obviously.
What do you usually do when there's direct sunlight, it's 30 degrees outside?
Yeah, so sometimes you can't avoid it. Shoot into the sun, that's one that you can do, depending on the look that you're trying to get. Again, if you're shooting open, that's the problem. If you're shooting quite wide, you can basically, knock down the exposure compensation. I would probably, you could spot for that, but it will kind of center weighted average. Again, evaluation is kind of what I normally go for, because again, if you're shooting in the sun, you're going to get very, very dark, and obviously if you want to kind of boost the exposure up on that a little bit, you've obviously got the exposure's already set on the face, everything else is going to be kind of blown out. So it varies. Again, say for example you have shot, I always knock it down when it maybe one stop, just to be safe, that I've not got any blown highlights anywhere. But then obviously when you crank it up, you're going to get some discoloration, overexposure in some bits. Obviously with my preset that I've knocked the highlights down to give a bit more flat tone. But you can still get nasty kind of dark kind of contrast. So if you're finding you've got that, you can just push the contrast back. Again, I already have my contrast pushed back quite far in the preset anyway, so it's obviously once I applied the preset, this is what I've got to work with. So yeah, knocking back the contrast can help that without changing the image too much. It works for my setup. It's not going to be the case for
everyone.
Everyone's got a different way of color grading their images, their work. It's just what works for me. Sometimes you can push the shadows up more. Again, depends if you're. It just depends on the environment and what you're.
What you're used to, I guess.
Yeah.
And talking about everyone that does things differently. So what is your approach and what is your subject matter in your project, Cambridge? How do you? That is the question that everyone who encounters your profile and your project thinks. How do you choose them? Because there's such a variety of people.
Yeah. So again, it's not. People say to me like, why do you only photograph
Alrighty, let's take a break. The Cambridge Photography Show is happening this October. If you're interested in photography, videography, or about gear, you should come and visit, because all the major brands are there, loads of photographers attending to network, great variety of talks and workshops. You got a lot to miss out, so if you're interested, just please visit cambridgephotographyweek.com. Once again, cambridgephotographyweek.com to find out more about the show, about the tickets, and what's happening. Now back to the podcast.
Young, pretty women. And I'm like, no. First of all, the reason why there are a lot of, say, young women on there, and again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There is a high percentage, it's a student town, student city, there's a high percentage of women than there are to men, as in per population.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was definitely that, yeah. I'm not sure if that's, don't quote me on this, but that's what it was when I first came here, and I believe it has been that. To be honest, you can see you've got the...
It's out there.
Yeah, it's out there. Yeah. So I photograph the young students, men, women, LGBT, plus, Q+, animals, older generation. I've had people say, why don't you photograph, people more my age? I'm like, I do. You just haven't really had a look, And it was actually funny that there was a lady a few years ago said, and I got a bit offended at this, and she said, I've noticed, I really like your work, I follow you, but I noticed you only photograph, young women, and I was like, the way that you've made that sound is very creepy, and that's really not what I'm about at all. And I did explain that. She said, I've only just looked at the first bit of your page and it's just young women. I went, it's just because that's the footfall of the people that are coming through where I am, which is not a very big circle of area that I work with. And then just below there was a repost of a really cool old lady with glasses, and she was fabulous. So I approach people. It doesn't matter sex, gender, age, whatever. So long as there's something about them that catches my curiosity, something, as I said before, if there is something that you see on someone that you like, you're drawn to them. It's the opposite of if you see somebody and you don't like anything about them, you're not attracted to them. You want to keep your distance. You don't want to interact with that person. Again, I don't know these people that I'm approaching. They could be anyone. I'm not making judgments on it. Yeah, I'm not making judgment of appearance, but that's again, never judge a book by its cover. But again, but saying that as well, if I genuinely don't find somebody interesting, or again, everyone's different. Everyone has personal tastes. Everyone sees the world. Everyone has their own map of the world. We see the world differently, even though we think we all see the same thing. We interpret things so much more differently. And that is, for me, is the key point. You can't run up to someone for the sake of taking a portrait, because when you try and do that, you're then searching for, let's see, what have we got here? Yeah. It's not selling, They're not feeling the vibe that you're invested in them, because by approaching them, you're investing your time because you want to capture something that appeals to you, and it could be hair, it could be an item of clothing. Again, important thing is never comment on somebody's physical part of the body. So you can talk about like tattoos on the body, etc. And I think the closer you can probably get, because I remember I approached, there was this a very attractive girl, and I'm being really open and honest with this because you are attracted to attractive people. And I said to her, I said, look, I wasn't sold on what she was wearing, but I said to her, I said, look, you have an amazing face. I'd absolutely love to photograph you, take a portrait. And I showed her what it was for. And then when I positioned her, I realised that the background, the colour, the analogous colours kind of worked really well. And I went, actually, this is great. This is really, really good. So I got more than I bargained for, or I hoped for. And I was really happy with them because she had this just a great face. It's,
Photogenic.
So my approach is always like, I'm truthful and honest about it, but that's a very small percentage of why I approach people. I don't approach attractive, beautiful people all the time. I've photographed such a kaleidoscope of characters that you would probably say, well, yeah, they might not fit into the category of being attractive people, which I guess is probably quite a harsh thing to say.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Everyone is attractive one way or another.
But here's the interesting thing. So everyone thinks, so who I wouldn't consider as attractive is who I would personally feel attracted to. Other people would see, oh, they're an attractive person. But here's the cool thing. No matter who you are, what how physically appealing you are to other people, when you're in the photograph, everyone is beautiful. That for me, and the reason why they become attractive in that way is because you're connecting with them, you're seeing their smile, you're seeing them laugh, you're seeing them animated. For me, that's the beauty of it. That's what makes that person, every single person, dare to say, the beautiful,
I like how you light up when you speak about this project.
Well, that's the
because
passion.
it's
And
amazing.
again, and I've got an excitable character. I do try and tone it down a little bit sometimes. But again, this is what you're seeing here right now is what someone experiences when I approach them. They see the genuine interest in them, and that kind of vibe, that excitement, it kind of bounces off. So you've already got that connection, and they want to be involved as well, and it's so much fun. And when you get that reciprocation back, it's just such a joy, which makes going back to editing the pictures later even more fun, because you're reliving that moment, and it's great. It's so much fun. And I guess the great thing about the project itself is every encounter is different, but every encounter is fun, and you get a nice exchange. And I've made some really nice friends along the way, and there's been some opportunities that have come through, and it's nice that I feel like there's a community that's kind of come about, through the actual project. I call it, the hot community, or thank you for being, a part of the community. And it's kind of nice. It's not like a tribal sort of thing. It's more like everyone that you see around, I guess, is in the community. It's just, I guess it's forget the word now. It's just your time will come when you'll end up on it. I've had people before say there was this gorgeous girl. She had this gorgeous Afro hairstyle. It was amazing. And I approached her, and she went, "Oh my God, I've been waiting for like a whole year for this to happen." I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool." No, it's great, and it's really nice to kind of get that kind of, to hear that as well, because it shows that what you're doing is having an impact. I had a really nice comment from a guy just recently, saying that he wasn't comfortable being in photographs, having his photograph taken, but I managed to capture him, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. So you see this exterior of people that aren't showing themselves, but having a complete stranger come up to you and being able to bring you out, who you are, and then you're seeing yourself and going, yeah, that's I like that. So it's creating an emotion and a feeling, I guess. And again, for me, I get to relive that when I kind of go through and edit the photos again. And then it's nice being able to kind of see them when they're kind of posted live, and then seeing people's reactions to them. And yeah, it's just, that's why I do it. It's you could call me selfish, because I really enjoy it.
Well, that's your project.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And the last question about Humans of Cambridge is, do you think there will ever be a conclusion to this project? Or you're gonna keep going until you die?
I've never really... There was one period where I was like, oh, this sucks, I'm not going to do it anymore, And,
but if you would see this not as a bad ending, but as a happy ending to a project, just to give you a context.
Yeah, I've never really thought of it that way. I think it's funny. A friend of mine said to me, he says, when you've got your camera, you just can't stop, can you? And I was at her exhibition, and I was just going to take some pictures of,
At the exhibition.
of literally just her. But then I ended up just, you just go into a mode. It's like a drug, once you take the camera, pick up the camera. And again, the quality of the glass, I feel, is really important, because it really changes how you photograph, how you approach, different challenges it gives you. But like I said, with the 75 1.2, it makes me want to see what I can capture, to see, the passion's always there. So at the moment, I've never seen an end to it. I feel like it's just something I'm going to keep doing. You know, I already foresee, you know, the next 2 years, but then, you know, I've seen other photographers bring out books from like the last 10 years. Again, I do this. This is my own pleasure, my own thing. So I feel like thinking that it's going to be an end. I don't really want there to be, because it brings me so much joy doing it, and the effect that it has on the people that I photograph. You know, it does wonders. It has done wonders.
And I can imagine a body of work after 10 years. Imagine.
But can you imagine the level? Imagine, look at how, you know, when it first started. You know, you scroll all the way down, you'll look at the first images, and then look how it's kind of evolved through there. I'm just wondering, okay, that's in what, nearly 3 years. I wonder how it evolves. You know, where I'll be in the next. You know, and I feel like my work is at a standard now that I'm happy with, but I'm always looking for ways to improve and tweak, and who knows, it might change, because the actual theme of it started off as a lockdown project and a way to communicate and interact with people, and then obviously it's kind of, you know, I can't deny it's primarily based on fashion, but it's not more about the fashion. Okay, I'm drawn towards the fashion because when I first did this, the influx of new students that came in was so much different than the previous year or years. And I thought to myself, everyone looks really cool. Like, everyone's got this great fashion sense, and, you know, a great mix of 80s and 90s and some 60s and 70s, like all like a medley together.
Especially in Cambridge, you've got loads of styles. There's no such a particular trend going on, but there's 1,000 people with 1,000 styles, which is beautiful.
And I feel it's such a shame to just not get to... Okay, for me, I want to kind of document. I've always loved documentary kind of style, you know, photography and portraiture. But being able to not only just capture people's, you know, when you're photographing, you know, fashion stuff or street stuff, you get the kind of standard, you know, full portrait. But it's more, for me, it's about them as well, because sure, I've noticed their clothes, but I've also kind of notice them as well. And again, for me, I want to be able to share with the audience my experience with them as well. So it's like, you know, say I'm a stranger looking at, you know, at the Instagram account, and I'm seeing these people looking at me, smiling as though I'm kind of interacting with them. So you're getting a real intimate experience with them. And what was the question?
The question was, this goes back to how would you conclude the book, but not the book, but the project. But yeah, we just got into a little bit of questions.
By the way, to the listeners, I'm very good at sidetracking.
It's amazing though. Take notes.
Yeah.
But I think the whole question here was, what is your subject matter? And I think we covered it really well.
Yeah, the subject matter is people. You know, that's the main focus. Obviously, there's the, you know, the first catch is obviously what draws my attention to them. So it could be anything that you're wearing. You know, if you, the more brighter you are, it's interesting. The brighter, the more vibrant the people what the person is wearing is also an indication of their character as well, and I do find it quite fascinating. Sometimes, and I have noticed people are wearing kind of a lot of dark or a very bit more kind of subdued, or in a certain kind of, you know, maybe gothic kind of sense, or their characters a little bit more kind of controlled, shall we say, or not. And if I find sometimes that they are quite closed in, I try and make them laugh, and this is where you know, if they're standing there and I'm taking a portrait and they look very, very serious, I'm like, nah, this looks like, you know, maybe they've done some modelling before, you know, or I'm not really connecting, and I'll just, you know, I think it was very random the first time I said it. I was like, you know, you've just found out you've won 1 million potatoes. And the hardest point was, most of the time people laugh and they actually get very animated, more animated than you could hope for. And you're like, yes! So you've got to be prepared for that as well. But then sometimes they'll look at you just deadpan. I'm like, did they hear me? Okay. I'm like, that wasn't funny, was it? And then sometimes I'm just like, okay, that's not going to work. What else can I do? So I'll just try to, again, focus on other stuff about them, get them to talk, maybe relive a memory or something, because you want the response to be genuine, you know?
Yeah.
They're not interacting with the camera, they're interacting with the photographer. So it's like, you know, it's a two-way thing. So, you know, they're interacting with me, but also as their audience, they're kind of interacting with the audience as well. You know, they're sharing them. They're sharing. You know, their
piece of soul. They're releasing a piece of soul.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, I read this somewhere. I think I was at university. That there is this tribe in America, not in America, in Africa, and they believe that once you take a picture of a human, you take their soul away.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean, that's the extreme. However, you do take that little bit when you capture a moment of someone, regardless whether they know about it or not. I think you do somewhere, somehow, because it's there.
The interesting thing about it is, the way I see it is, and this is what I find fascinating about photography, you're literally capturing a moment in time, which is why I love, like, some of the work that we do here in the University Library in the digital content unit is, you know, we work with a lot of old glass lantern slides, and you're seeing portraits of people that don't exist anymore. But those photons that hit them, that then bounce back into the lens, they're still there. It's weird. I just look. They're like portals, in, you know, going back in time. And for the work that I do, to be honest, a lot of the people that I photograph as well, you know, they are our future. You know, some of the younger generation, they could be next prime minister. They could be, you know, next person to discover that, you know, a way to save, you know, humanity, to end, you know, poverty, to be the founders of. You don't know.
Never know.
But that's the good thing about it as well. My images, they have, I guess they're timeless in the sense that they can never be offensive, you know, because they're just captures of real people in non-compromising situations that you would never want to kind of surface like in the future. And it's also memories as well. You know, it is memories, and for me, it is a memory because when you have that experience and you remember that experience, and you know, I have a short-term, you know, memory. You know, I'm not that great, but it's interesting with the photograph. When I go back and look at photos from like years ago, I remember that moment, that time. You know, it might be 30 seconds of, you know, the thing, but I remember the interaction, and it's all about. It's interesting how it does evoke so much feeling and emotion. It's a whole different topic.
Yeah, I agree. But you touched on your lab, which your current job role.
Yes.
Can you talk about this a little bit more?
Sure. So again, I'm working on Darwin at the moment. Correspondence. Been working on that for a good number of years, and basically what we're doing is we've had the exhibition already, and we are digitising the entire collection. Well, there's always new things coming up, but we're basically digitising it.
Can you give us an idea of what an entire collection looks like? Like, how big is it?
Is it like 8,000 individual letters, for example?
8,000 individual letters.
But then you've got bound volumes. So yeah, there will be within the bound volumes. We have loose letters. There's photographs as objects. You know, there's obviously the Tree of Life notebooks, which I had the great opportunity to actually get to digitise. So I guess if you ever see any new images of the Tree of Life, that came from here. So yeah, that's kind of pretty cool. But again, we've worked with some really interesting items in the collection. Hawking, for example, a few years back after he passed, my colleague Bourget and I actually went to the mathematical kind of campus where he has his office, and we created 3D photogrammetry of his office and photographed his memorabilia, his books. Obviously from there there was an exhibition on Hawking with it had some of the transcript from The Simpsons when he was in that, which is really cool.
I saw it. I remember I was in his office for a photo shoot for Wired magazine.
Yeah.
And I was there with Platon.
Yeah.
And I went in there and I was shocked because I was not meant to be there, but I was.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
looked up and there was like The Simpsons were there, like
Yeah.
the original
Did you
characters.
see on the chalkboard they had the black hole theory thing going on there?
Maybe.
They had this kind of like vortex, and it was basically talking about, I think it was like a wormhole or gravitational. Yeah. Anyway, it was just so interesting to be in that room. It was also, when we were there, it was height of summer and the aircon wasn't on, and it was blisteringly hot, and he still had his a PC machine just running away doing calculations, under his desk. But it was interesting because being in that environment, and you kind of, and with all this stuff around you, you kind of have a little connection. You feel a little connection with the presence that was kind of formerly there,
So I guess his office is not there anymore. I mean, like, they haven't kept a space to commemorate him.
I've no idea. Maybe they have. I think probably they have done, to be honest, because it's, I don't know.
Next time I'll go by there. If I go to the gym in West Cambridge, I'm gonna stop by and just knock. Go to the reception and ask. Guys.
I'd be keen to know about
Yeah,
that. I would have thought they would have done, to be honest. I think a lot of his items. So we've actually, as the library itself, I think we've digitised most of his work. So we're actually making it now available for free for research. So that's the idea of the library. What we do is we digitise collections and things in the archives, obviously in the interest of the public, and that holds significant academic research data. So obviously we need to get funding to go through and actually, because sometimes these digitisation jobs take years. Darwin's been 25 years, maybe more in the making. And I'm the last person to actually be doing it, which is kind of cool at the same time. And then obviously once they're digitised, they get put on to CUDL, the Cambridge University Digital Library, where these items are available around the world. For people that can't come and see the collection, for example, that's why we photograph a lot of objects. We do studio photography. We're doing a lot of 3D scanning now, so we can actually produce these high-resolution 3D scans of objects that are otherwise, say, maybe too fragile. So we would need to think of ways to preserve them for future generations while handling them as little as possible. And it's a good way. And obviously we do a lot of things with, we do RTI photography, radial transformational imaging, which is another interesting way to photograph physical objects using a digital movable light source. Say, for example, you have your glasses here, and we have a fixed camera above, and then we have a dome that takes individual shots 180 degrees in a dome like that, but it will flash, and you'll get all these different views. Stationary, but the light source is moving around, and then you have a bit of software where you can move that light source around, and you can actually see things that you would never normally see under just a normal light, which is interesting. And it's very good for, especially if you're doing macro photography we're doing on some punches, basketball punches, and you can actually, with that light source, you can actually see damage that's been done to it, and all sorts of other interesting things that's good for people who want to know more about the history of certain items, how they're used, how that damage was acquired, and by using this RTI photography. And you can also incorporate multispectral imaging into that as well. Again, multispectral has fantastic research opportunities, because you have manuscripts. Back then, the vellum was quite expensive to reproduce, made from animal skin. So they would wash off the old text and then rewrite, and you'd sometimes get Arabic, and then 100 years later you'll get some maybe Jewish manuscripts on there as well, text. I forget the name of the other cool language we found. But with the multispectral, you'll find that the text will be written one way, and then the text maybe will be written in another way. Armaic, is that the right one? Someone will correct me on this. But it's great, and you can also find out the type of ink that was used. So we have a lot of problems with iron gall ink that's quite corrosive. So say, for example, the ink is completely gone and you cannot see the ink using the multispectral. What you can do is, with the multispectral imaging, you can actually see where the ink is corroded into the actual vellum itself. So you have this kind of like embossing that's you can't see at all. But with the multispectral imaging, using different wavelengths, you can actually pick this up and be able to highlight and bring it forward, bring the text below the text on top by changing some of the colouring, bit of tweaking here and there. You can actually make it more visible. So sometimes you can have 3 or 4 different texts on there. And then obviously with the different pigmentation of the ink, you'll be able to, again, play around a little bit to make this text blue and this one red, so you'll be able to tell the difference between the two.
Amazing. So I guess this is something for the future generations, not for us today.
It's for today, but it's also for the future as well. And the whole idea is that of digitization of the archive is, again, it's to preserve the physical items, because sometimes the items aren't actually going to last that long. So the digitized, the master preservation files will be the things that will actually survive, whereas the actual physical items may just crumble away. Or R2, we've had old nitrate film, which is highly combustible, and just it's falling apart. So one of my colleagues, Emily, was photographing a lot of this nitrate film very, very carefully, as a means to create to preserve it. If you can't preserve something that's unpreservable, but then you can you can capture that image, and that will be, for example, with those ones, will be the only record that we have. But then that can be used for generations to come, whereas the actual item itself won't last that long.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for covering this. This is actually a very, very interesting role, I'd say, because you get to see things that most people would never see in their lives, not even by accident.
It is a pretty cool thing. And it's funny, so that's my day job. And then the Cambridge project, I didn't mention before, but I go out on my lunch break, so I have, half an hour, 45 minutes. And I will stop people. If I've got a coffee or a sandwich, if I see an opportunity, I'll run up, I'm like, excuse me, yeah. And most of the time, they find it quite funny. But it's such a small window of opportunity. So you've got, again, maybe you can relate that to the Humans of Cambridge. You've got a small window of opportunity to capture that, but then obviously with the work of the library, some things that you're working with, there's a small window that you've got to actually work with it to capture it, to make sure that it it's...
That's the dedication, because if you think about it, lunch break in theory sounds like, go sit down, relax your thoughts, don't think about anything, and what you do is the complete opposite. You go from one job with one camera to another space with a different camera.
Yeah. But then it's interesting as well, because I'm going on my lunch break, but then the people that you're approaching, they're also on their lunch break.
Yeah.
So it's really good that you can actually give you that time. So yeah.
Beautiful. And now, Mark, time for the last question. That's gonna be the most difficult question. If you could choose an era to live in, whichever one, which one would it be? Whichever one, it can be from the pre-existence of human beings till the future in 5,000 after Christ. And why? That is the question. Why would you choose it?
Do you know what? I think, honestly, if you say you wanted to live in the future, it's because you already have a concept of the digital age and, you know, everything that we have now. But we know that. And I think going back to, I wouldn't say the medieval times, because I know life was brutal then. But I think maybe, you know, maybe the birth of photography, for example. I think,
Oh, no, yes.
because, when was that? What,
26.
Was that 1826?
1826, yeah. First ever picture was taken in 1826.
Was that the one that was done on a bottle with the light going through manure? Because I remember that was the first kind of image, well, not photograph, but image that was done.
I think so. It was by Nicephore Niepce. It was taken. There was a picture of his garden.
Yeah.
1826.
Oh, wow. Okay. At least I got some of my facts right. But I think it's not only that, but it's obviously this. The fact that I find just photography now is it's so abundant, it's so available. I think the wonder of how it is just it's not appreciated as much. We just take it as, you know, as for granted, you know. For granted. But when you think about it, the fact that we can capture time, for example, I guess you're capturing light, which is incredibly more interesting than you actually think you know it is, because it behaves in such a strange way. Total tangent, I'm not going to talk about that. But it's the rebirth of that, but also the age without all this, you know, digital technology. I think people, again, obviously, you know, times then were, as a society, might not have be as free as we are now. But I love the way that they dressed, you know. The elegance of it all.
The suburbs, you know, when you dress up nice.
But then you've got to say, okay, if you're going to live in what era, like, what, you know, what class would you prefer to be in, you know?
Of course you have the choice.
Yeah, if you had the choice, but a lot of people didn't have the choice in that time. In fact, the majority of the population were, you know, were poor, very poor.
Imagine going back to that period of time,
Oh,
as you are now with your camera.
Yeah.
Bam! You go there like I'm an alien, motherfuckers.
Whoa.
I can imagine.
It would be. Can you imagine though, being able to, even with your phone, like, just show them an image of themselves? It would be mind blowing.
Oh, they would kill you. They will hang you.
But imagine that. Imagine showing somebody a photograph, especially something that you can take digitally within an instant, or even with a Polaroid, being able to capture that thing. That's just like, and they've never seen it before. I think that's that's probably what I love about photography, is that we are so lucky that we're able to do this, you know, and we don't realise just how much we rely on photography. A lot of the things that you see, these models, 3D models and stuff, they rely on photography. They rely on, you know, the photons hitting the, you know, the sensors, or hitting the, you know, the light sensitive film on analog. Analog, by the way, is still my favourite. It's true. It's unedited, shall we say. As opposed to digital photography, you have, you know, a lot of freedom to really mess around or fuck it up. But with analog photography, which is what I do try and steer to keep some analogous kind of aesthetic to it. I add grain to my images, probably don't see it, but I used to be obsessed with everything being tack sharp. But I found sometimes that some of my images I don't get quite right. But then I'm like, but it still looks good. And when you actually, it's the frame, it's the subject. The eyes might not be in focus. You've got the hat, you've got the front of the hat. Okay, it's not what you're after, but it's still, you've got that smile. Whereas the first one is in focus and it doesn't look as good. But the one that's maybe not perfectly in focus still has the same, what you saw at the time is what you actually wanted to capture. You just didn't quite get the focus. So for me, looking back at some of the old photographs that I've worked with, hardly any of them. Some of them are amazingly in focus, but the majority of them are not in focus or soft focus. But it's the context, it's the composition, it's what is within the image that actually makes it.
And I think also that when you take a picture, and if it's out of focus, that's absolutely fine because you
might have something in focus in the background which actually that looks great.
That looks good. And you have a series of, I think this is where a series of pictures is always strong, because if one doesn't work and it's out of focus or whatever it is, the other four will compensate for it.
Yeah, so if you're shooting analog though, you don't have that much freedom in there. So just quickly to finish this off with shooting digital, again, like I said, I shoot three or five frames to try and nail the shot. It's weird as well. You think you've got your composition. I try and frame in camera as much as I can, but you realise you move around an awful lot, even when you think you're pretty centered. But with analog, you have to take your time with it, and I think. This is why I appreciate some guys on Instagram, photographers on Instagram who do portraits. You appreciate them more because they've done 1 or 3 shots on film, but they are so much more thought out, and you appreciate what you're seeing more because, again, they're trying to capture, especially portraits, are trying to capture someone, and they're trying to capture the best of them, and obviously. With the analog stuff, especially the black and white, they have a lot more mood, a lot more feel to them, maybe a bit more of a message. Even looking at this accidental, shot, and that's of the wall. Is that the wall of the brickwork or something?
Yeah, it is.
It's a cool shot. Oh, you know what? You could put that on Instagram.
Really? That's the nice way to conclude this. Well, thank you, Mark.
Yeah,
it's been an enormous pleasure. I really had a great time. And I'm sure people will learn a lot from you.
Oh, I hope so.
And cut!
The Cambridge Photography Show is happening this 7th of October, and you shouldn't miss it. There's big brands, there's great deals, variety of workshops and talks. And if you're a photographer interested in photography, you should be there. To book your place or ticket, just simply visit CambridgePhotographyWeek.com. Once again, CambridgePhotographyWeek.com. See you there.